The story didn't begin with a document. It began with a question that quietly unsettled people who thought they understood the marriage. A question whispered in legal circles, repeated in online forums, and finally dragged into the light by commentary that refused to fade away. What if there was something written long before the cameras, the vows, and the fairy tale language? What if the agreement that bound everything together also contained an exit few ever noticed? And more importantly, what if one side never fully understood what they had agreed to? When Tom Bauer began speaking about contracts, clauses, and legal foresight, it wasn't presented as a sudden revelation, but as a slow unpeeling of assumptions. Bauer has always framed his commentary as interpretation rather than proof, suggesting patterns, motivations, and preparation rather than delivering courtroom facts. And yet, when he implied that a so-called divorce clause may have existed in some form, and that Harry may not have fully grasped its implications, the reaction was immediate and intense. Not because of what was proven, but because of what was possible. To understand why this idea shook so many people, you have to go back to the early days of the relationship, before titles and public roles reshaped everything. At that stage, the balance between experience and innocence was already uneven. Meghan had lived in the public eye, navigated contracts, agents, and negotiations. Harry, despite his status, had lived a life largely shielded from legal complexity by institutions that handled details for him. In that contrast, some observers began to wonder whether preparation and awareness were truly equal. Bauer never claimed to have seen a specific document. Instead, he spoke about mindset. He described a way of thinking that anticipates outcomes, both good and bad. In his telling, Meghan approached life as someone who planned for every scenario, while Harry moved forward, guided more by emotion and trust. The idea that a legal safeguard might exist wasn't presented as scandal, but as strategy. And it was that framing that unsettled people the most. Online discussions quickly filled the gaps. Some argued that any modern marriage involving wealth, titles, and global attention would naturally involve legal protections. Others insisted that love alone guided the union, and that suggesting otherwise diminished it unfairly. The debate wasn't really about legality. It was about belief. Did people want to see the marriage as purely emotional, or were they ready to accept that practicality might have played a role behind the scenes? Bauer's commentary leaned into that discomfort. He suggested that Harry, accustomed to trusting advisors and systems, may not have scrutinized every detail with the intensity others might have. Not because he was careless, but because he had never been required to think that way before. In that interpretation, the idea of not knowing what he signed wasn't about deception, but about difference. A difference in experience. A difference in instinct. Supporters of Meghan were quick to push back. They argued that suggesting hidden clauses or unbalanced understanding played into unfair narratives about manipulation. They emphasized that Harry was an adult, capable of making his own decisions, and that framing him as unaware stripped him of agency. To them, the conversation felt less like analysis and more like an attempt to undermine a woman's intelligence. By turning foresight into suspicion. Critics, however, leaned in the opposite direction. They pointed to past statements about independence and self-protection, interpreting them as evidence of careful planning. For them, Bauer's suggestion fit a broader pattern they believed they had already seen. Again, no proof was offered, but the narrative was compelling enough to keep spreading. What made the story linger wasn't its certainty, but its ambiguity. A secret clause doesn't need to exist in writing to exist in perception. The idea alone was enough to provoke endless speculation. People began asking what such a clause would even look like. Would it be a traditional agreement? A conditional understanding? Or simply a legal framework designed to protect assets and autonomy. Each question opened another door, and the conversation grew more complex by the day. There was also a deeper emotional layer that many struggled to articulate. The discomfort came from imagining a relationship where trust and preparation coexisted uneasily. Could someone love deeply while still planning for separation? Some said yes, calling it maturity. Others said no, calling it doubt. The disagreement revealed more about cultural attitudes toward marriage than about the individuals involved. Bauer's role in the story became almost symbolic. He wasn't presenting a case, but a lens. Through that lens, people re-examined old interviews, body language, and public statements, searching for signs that aligned with their chosen interpretation. A comment about independence here. A remark about self-worth there. Suddenly, everything felt loaded with meaning. Harry's silence only amplified the speculation. He didn't address the idea directly, and that absence allowed others to speak for him. Some imagined confusion. Others imagined quiet acceptance. And some imagined frustration that private legal matters were being debated so publicly. Without his voice, every version felt equally plausible to those who wanted to believe it. What's often missed in these discussions is how much of this story lives in the space between fact and assumption. No document has been produced. No clause has been confirmed. What exists is interpretation, layered on observation, filtered through opinion. Yet that hasn't stopped the idea from taking root. Because in the modern media landscape, a compelling possibility can feel almost as powerful as confirmation. There's also the question of why this narrative resonates so strongly. Part of it lies in the public's fascination with control and vulnerability. The idea that one partner might have been legally prepared while the other relied on trust touches a nerve. It challenges romantic ideals and forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about how power can operate quietly. Another part lies in how Tom Bauer frames his work. He rarely makes direct accusations. Instead, he invites readers and viewers to connect dots themselves. That approach leaves space for imagination, and imagination often fills gaps with emotion. The secret divorce clause became less about paperwork and more about perception, about who people believe holds the upper hand and why got as the story.